Welcome back to the program. I'm joined now live here in the studio by Liberal MP Jason Falinski. Thanks for your company.
Thank you, Peter.
Cory Bernardi's new party, it's just growing and growing.
Yes, it is. But correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't Family First defunct?
Defunct as a party?
Yeah, well, like without Bob Day there, they kind of lost their primary organiser, primary funder.
Oh, sure.
You know.
But it's still got the party status, the organisation. I mean, don't get me wrong, I doubt that there's a massive organisation, but there is an organisation there, and it's a network beyond South Australia as well, don't forget.
Oh, that's a good point.
And Cory Bernardi obviously has and would always have been limited to South Australia as a Liberal senator. I mean, do you welcome it? The reason I ask that is I've written an opinion piece for the Oz on this where I've made the point, I wonder whether you agree, that people should wish Bernardi's party well, because a party of the right that Cory Bernardi leads is better than a Pauline Hanson One Nation party on the right. And for him to succeed, he would really have to take skin off her.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Look, I think we should welcome anyone who comes into the parliament or the political firmament who's got good ideas, policies that can help build Australia's prosperity. I mean, I don't know whether Cory's at that point yet, but he's a senator. The government continues to work with him. We're getting a lot of stuff through the Senate with his support. He's
going to be there for a good 6 years, obviously. He was elected on a Liberal banner, but so he's okay for the time being.
Yeah.
Between then and now, are there opportunities for them to try to win seats, but particularly in the Senate? I mean, at state level, maybe. New South Wales is a classic one. You'd know the upper house there. That's something they could target with a low quota threshold.
Yeah.
But at the Senate level, it's going to be hard for any minor party beyond the big established ones with the Senate reforms.
Well, that's right. And, you know, even in New South Wales, I mean, it's a bit of a lottery towards the back end of it. But so, you know, you've got the Animal Justice Party in there at the moment. But, you know, it's hard to know who would get elected in New South Wales right towards the end. Look, as I say, I mean, I think Australians are more kind of interested in, you know, have you got some good... Like, people are genuinely worried about what their jobs look like, what their future prosperity looks like, what all this means for their families.
Sure.
And this sort of stuff doesn't really...
Yeah, you're right, but Liberal Party members, particularly on the Conservative side of the party, and you're from the moderate side of the party, they always worry, you know, whether the Liberal Party's being conservative enough. They worry about Malcolm Turnbull, they worry about Gladys Berejiklian in New South Wales. They worry a lot that the party's not conservative enough. What does that mean, though, when they look at a party like Cory Bernardi's? OK, they might not like that he's, you know, ratted on the Liberal Party, but he is conservative. He's united now with another conservative brand. There must be some concern that conservative Liberals are going to say, you know what, I'm ditching the party, I'm moving to this side.
Well, look, I know Andrew Hastie's on the record as saying that you know, he wants us to make sure we're not losing people, you know, who are conservative. I've got to say, though, you know, people who make the effort to ring my office on some of those, you know, those symbolic issues that the Conservatives have. So they take the time to ring me, come into my office, which isn't, you know, shows a level of commitment that people don't normally have. Even they, after 10, 15 minutes, will continue to raise questions that are effectively economic in nature. What does my job look like? What opportunities will my children have? I think if we focus on that, you know, we're really actually dealing with a lot of people's anxiety.
But then doesn't that, Jason Falinski, become a case of you're trying to get the preference flows? Because you're right. If the Liberal Party are doing better than Labor on those key issues, then those voters who might be coming to you in the first instance on everything from 18C to whatever else it might be, they will then continue to go your way rather than Labor's way. But there's a bleed risk, and there's also a risk of that protest vote in an upper house leading to the election of an alternative party on the Conservative side, which isn't as much of an issue in lower house contests.
No, probably not. Look, mate, we don't know. We'll just have to keep doing a good job and let the cards fall where they may. I mean, you know, we'll keep putting up good policies, we'll keep trying to argue for them and communicate that with people and see what happens. But I don't think either you or I know how this is all going to turn out. It is interesting when it comes to One Nation that, in particular in Queensland, the data seems to be that about 80% of her votes come from Palmer United Party supporters, and the remaining 20% that she's got, it's not actually from the Liberal Party. There's, you know, cross-section. She's getting a lot of votes from the Labor Party. She's getting a lot of votes from the Greens.
Is that why it's worth considering for the Liberals to look at doing a preference deal with One Nation like what happened in Western Australia, or is your view that you can't do that? Because if you can get a deal done, I'm not sure if her voters would necessarily follow the how to vote card, but if you can get a deal, or whether One Nation would distribute it widely enough to be worth it, or whether the pain in the broader electorate of doing a deal is worth any benefit that you might get.
Mate, you're talking me out of it as we go.
But this is the conundrum for the Liberal Party. If you don't do a preference deal, I can, don't get me wrong, I can see the conundrum for the Liberals, because if you don't do a preference deal, then you're going to potentially bleed votes. If you do one, you might not get as much as you should, and it might be counterproductive because of the criticism in the media. What do you do?
Well, I mean, I think the answer is you go back to good policy. I mean,
you've got to do a preference deal, whether you got good policy.
You've got to do preference deals at the end, and I mean, but at the end of the day, you want to be able to say to the people who are currently supporting One Nation, don't support One Nation, come and support the LNP in Queensland. Because the answer to that is...
Falinski, you can campaign on that all you want. You've still got to ultimately make this decision. This is the big decision. Do you put them last, or do you put them ahead of Labor? And, you know, in a sense, do you think that Labor have been unfair to demand that the Liberals put them last when they don't put the Greens last, for example?
Of course. I mean, you look at some of the Greens policies and you go, well, does that mean you guys are signing up to that? Are you guys signing up to boycotts on Israel and a whole bunch of other stuff? I mean, the fact of the matter remains that, you know, I think Labor, we should take as much advice from Labor on this as Labor takes from us on their preference deals, which is probably zero.
So in other words, you're open to One Nation not being put last?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Issues of the day, or really the issues of the next couple of weeks as we count down to budget. It'll be your first budget as an elected member of Parliament.
That's true.
Are you going to expect to be treated, you know, like a squirrel, not be allowed to see anything, or a mole underground? Is that what they do to the party room, or do they let you guys in on the secret, which you're all then going to stand and give an ovation to when you've only heard it for 20 minutes?
Well, look, I've got to say that, as you say, this is my first one. I have been pleasantly surprised and at the level of engagement from the Treasurer, the Finance Minister, Michael Sukkar, around
about what they're looking to do. Take us through it. Give us a few exclusives. What do we got?
To get our feedback on stuff, etc.
What are they considering?
So I don't think that there'll be... I mean, look, we have to respect the process, obviously, and you knew I was going to say that. And if you can contain your excitement, that would be really helpful. But, you know, I think they've been pretty consultative around what's going on and some of the stuff they're looking at. Most of it's been covered by you.
A lot of it's housing affordability. Should the federal government be getting in this space? You can't win. You can't win on this. If you solve, which you're never going to do, by the way, but if you solve the housing affordability crisis in some way, then all you do is you upset people that currently have houses because the growth rate is going to be diminished, because that's one of the ways you solve housing affordability. If you don't solve it, then you've put up a white flag to an issue that you've already sort of flagged as one that you're going to try to do something about. And most of this stuff is dictated by state-level changes anyway. Why are federal governments, both sides of politics are doing this more and more? Why are they trying to say that we can solve all your problems when you just can't?
Yeah, well, I mean, great question. And I think the answer to it, and the other thing you've left out is that this is a problem in Sydney and Melbourne.
It's not a national problem?
It's not a national problem. And one of the things, and you can almost see Scott Morrison, you know, just containing his frustration, just that, you know, people asking the federal government to take a macroeconomic sledgehammer to a microeconomic problem is not going to be helpful across the board, especially to the Australian economy. But there is stuff that the feds can do. But yeah, you're right.
But it's got to be downplayed.
It's got to be downplayed. It's got to be reasonable. You've got to set up expectations sensibly. I think we've done all of that, to be honest. You know, having Chris Bowen out there talking, like saying, oh, if we just got rid of foreign investors out of the housing market, that would solve all our problems. And to be fair to Chris, he's sort of paddled back from that. But, you know, stuff like that is just very unhelpful across the board. And look, even with Angus Taylor's stuff on the Better Cities program, 30-minute cities, he's having to work, you know, very closely with state governments around that. That's not something that can be done out of Canberra.
I mean, looking at the budget, how important is it for the health of the government? And what I mean by that is that, you know, let's call it what it is. Malcolm Turnbull has now hit 11 or is it 12 consecutive news polls behind Labor. He used the 30 of Abbott as his sort of wedge. We've got some more of these wars going on behind the scenes with Tony Abbott talking and Peter Dutton and Matthias Cormann having a bit of a crack at him for what he has to say. This stuff's happening. Scott Morrison, we all know he's under pressure. We also know that budgets are hard to be anything other than exercises in survival. You know, there's this misnomer that they somehow lift governments. The last budget that was received truly popularly was the 96 budget, which ironically was a brutal budget by Peter Costello. Even the handout budget since then weren't that well
I think
received.
the 96 budget was met not with approval but relief. I mean, Costello
started fixing.
Oh yeah, well, and Costello started by saying, you know, we've got this $8 billion. Remember when our black holes were $8 billion, Peter? Remember those good days?
And that was considered a lot of money then.
And, I mean, you had the CFMEU outside Parliament House storming it.
But Jason Falinski, you're making my point, which
Thank
is...
you. Well, I'm happy to do it. You often make
your job is to turn around and argue with it. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, you make a good point. An $8 billion black hole used to be seen as a big deal. Now we've got government standing up and saying, guess what, we're on fire here. We've got the deficit down to $28 billion. Yeah,
well, of course, as a proportion of GDP, they're different numbers. But having said that, look, the budget has to be a continuation of what has been a pretty consistent progress about we are going to use policies where we can to grow the economy, so we're going to try and grow our way out of it. We're going to use other policies to better target social policy so we can actually help people get out of the circumstances they're in. Then you've got the handbrake. Well, it's not a handbrake anymore of the Senate. You've just got the Senate filtering all of that. I've got to say I'm very impressed with Scott Morrison's level of detail, understanding of how the budget fits together, etc., etc. So, I would imagine we will get a very good budget. But even if I don't want to set up expectations.
Even if you do get a very good... Last question. Even if you do get a very good budget, how do you avoid getting past the reality that the Senate is so obstructionist as it stands now? I mean, how do I write in my column, how do I get my 1,200 words other than just writing the sentence, we saw the budget delivered yesterday, so what, the Senate's going to block it?
Well, I mean... The fact is, though, that in this term of Parliament, this government has managed to get a record number of pieces of and really difficult stuff as well.
There's like Frankenstein changes required.
Well, I mean, look, you know, some of it has required a bit of, you know, we're not going to do green corps anymore. We're going to do land care. Some of it's $70 payments to pensioners. So there's been stuff that's happened to get that through. But don't forget where we are in the cycle. This is the part where you're meant to be doing hard stuff. This is the part where you're meant to be doing the right stuff, not the popular stuff.
So you're expecting hard stuff in the budget?
Mate, I'm not here to set up expectations around the budget, but what I am saying to you as a commentator and a columnist is that I think this whole idea that governments need to be popular throughout their term is really just unreasonable. We've got a 3-year process. This is the period where you should be doing, you know, the hard stuff, so you can set, you know, as Keating used to say, you can switch to vaudeville later in the term.
We can all blame Kevin Rudd for that, because that was when it changed, Jason Falinski. John Howard was behind more than he was in front in the polls. You just quoted Paul Keating, and ever since Rudd, there's been this sort of constant drive to try to be popular. We're out of time, though. We'll talk again next week. Jason Falinski, appreciate your time.
See you, mate.
Oh, get a handshake. All right. We're going to take a quick break here on the program. When we come back, we'll have sport as we hear from both boxers ahead of the Battle of Brisbane.